Today we're doing Firebase Analytics versus Google Analytics for mobile. That is app tracking. I love app tracking because no one does it. Like if you get really good at app tracking, then you have a very bright future ahead of you. Everyone is into web, and web is fine and it's fun because it's easier, because you can make all the more changes. Apps, more difficult. Today, when you start tracking, there are two options. Either when you create the new property, choose mobile app, and we see here what is recommended is Firebase Analytics. And then there's something that was previously called Google Analytics Mobile App Tracking, but now it's called Google Analytics Services SDK. But they're really eager that you should choose Firebase Analytics. And why is that? That's what we're going to find out. What is the difference between Firebase Analytics and this Google Analytics Services SDK, or mobile app tracking for us as, mobile app tracking. Mobile app analytics. At the end of this video, I will tell you which one you should choose in what instance. Sometimes the old one, Google Analytics Services SDK or Mobile App Analytics, is better. Firebase Analytics versus Google Analytics Services SDK or Mobile App Analytics. Firebase is built for apps. They have like an app-first mindset. Whereas Google Analytics, the Google Analytics app tracking, it was basically you took the web tracking and then they changed page views into screen views. Basically, the page field became the screen field. But then all other things of Google Analytics were treated the same. So they used sessions and screens instead of page views, but they still had events and they had all the different things that the regular web tracking has. So the app tracking was adapted from the web, which was okay, but sometimes things could get really strange. Like the app tracking has the same concept of sessions as the web tracking. So if I open an app, and I get a screen view. Okay, I see the first screen of the app, that's fine. And then I shut the app. Was that a session? Yeah, that was a session. I did something, I saw one screen. Perhaps I even fired an event. But if I, 2 minutes later, open the app again, is that a new session? Or is that the same session? So by default, the app tracking uses the same 30-minute session timeout. So even though if I'm using my app as a second screen while watching old linear television, I'm watching soccer, and in the break I open my app, but I opened the app just when the soccer game started. So I opened the app like 25 minutes ago, and then there's a break and I open again. Because by default the 30-minute session timeout, it's checked that here it starts and over here is the end. But right before the session will time out, I'm bam, opening a new screen. And then I get 30 minutes more. So the app will see it as one hour session possibly. Even though for me as an analyst, I thought that the beginning of the soccer game was one session and the end of the soccer game was a different session. That is the big basic problem with the Google Analytics legacy app tracking, that it's based on the concept of sessions, whereas in the mobile world we don't use sessions, we're more like instances. We open the app and do something, and then we can do something else like right after that, or we can do it in a couple of months from now. But the whole session-based approach, it's not the best fit. So Firebase was built for this event-based tracking. So they have the concept of users and events, and they don't really care about sessions. So they care about active, like monthly active users or daily or weekly active users, and the events and what you do in the events. So that's really, really good. It's built for the app world. But Firebase Analytics is a pretty new tool, so it doesn't have real-time reports. It takes like 4 to 6 hours before the reports are processed, so it's pretty difficult to, like in the UI, debug. Whereas Google Analytics app tracking is like the ordinary web tracking. It has real-time reports. Even though you have to be careful about dispatching. I have a link below that on iOS, they don't send the hits as soon as it happens by default. So they send the hits after a couple of minutes, like in one big bunch. Instead of sending hit, and it can take a lot of batteries, they like take all the hits, put them together in one big basket, and then after a while, boom, fire them away. On Android, they do that as soon as you go out from the app and put the app, if you close the app. On iOS, they don't. So some differences there, and you can check that out in the description. Firebase has integration with AdWords. You can export Firebase Analytics segmentations. But Google Analytics has the entire suite of ad integrations. And even though not everything is in the app tracking, it's still, everything is so much easier with the old app tracking. Firebase has an automatic export to Google BigQuery, which is great. So you can make all the exports to Data Studio or Tableau or ClickView or whatever tool you're using, and do like a lot of analysis there and a lot of the nitty-gritty bits when you really want to figure things out. Whereas Google Analytics, you don't have that export unless you're paying for the Google Analytics 360 suite. Analytics 360, which is the premium paid version, and unless you're a big corporation, you're probably not paying for it. And even if you're a big corporation and paying for it, you have to set it up, and it's a bit of a mess. It's great to have it, and you need it for all the really, really tricky analysis, but you get it for free with Firebase Analytics, and you don't with the old Google Analytics. Firebase Analytics is also, you can just drop in the SDK and you get a bunch of tracking for free. Everything like app opens and different screens and a bunch of stuff, you get that automatically, which is great. If you're using the old app tracking, you have to manually, explicitly track everything. Either if you're using like Google Tag Manager and the data layer, or just you have to add events for everything, events or screens. So you have more control, but it's a bit limited. The UI in Firebase Analytics is pretty limited. You have a basic UI and it's sort of fine, but to make really, really fun and interesting analysis, you really have to make use of the export to Google BigQuery. Like Google BigQuery is great and Google Data Studio is great, it has a lot of potential. But if you come from the Google Analytics world and you're used to having access to all these easy segments, all these report filters and custom reports, and perhaps the funnels in the 360 suite, you will feel limited in the Firebase Analytics UI. Also, there's no integration. If you pay for 360, you can get the roll-up reporting. So perhaps you have one property for your iOS app, one property for your Android app, and then a third property for your web app. And then you can have all these three rolled up into this one super property called the roll-up property. And you can see everything there. And you can use the user ID. So you can, like, if you have the user ID on Android and iOS, perhaps you have like an iOS and iPad, and then you're using your Android phone, and you can be signed in on the web, and you use the same identification there, some kind of user ID. Then you can see the user and make segments in the rollup property. You cannot do that with Firebase Analytics. But because Firebase Analytics has the Google BigQuery export, you can of course export from your Firebase Analytics iOS app and then the Firebase Analytics Android app, and then you can export perhaps from your Google Analytics web tracking. And even though you don't have BigQuery, perhaps you have the standard, you can export with the standard API, and you can make a merge in Google Data Studio or Tableau or ClickView or whatever. But you get really, really technical, and it's, even though I'm technical and I like doing the technical stuff, it's a bit of a mess. The Google Analytics UI is faster for me, and that's sort of a drawback of Firebase Analytics. It has this potential with the BigQuery export, and it's great. I love the BigQuery stuff, and Data Studio is becoming pretty good to make like the basic analysis and set up reports and everything, but it's still like a lot of more work than what you can with just a basic segment and some custom reports. You have segmentation in Firebase Analytics. Still, I don't think it's that mature. I think that in a year or two, Firebase Analytics, which seems to be the future for Google in the app world, that will be great. If you're paying for 360, Firebase Analytics is not covered by the Analytics 360 service license agreement. Basically, they are not promising that they can process all the data and that they will keep it forever. If you're using Google Analytics, you are covered by the 360 service license agreement. But like, I sort of trust Google. I don't think they will mess with you. I think that you can use Firebase Analytics and it will work out. They just won't promise anything. And I think it's a legal thing, and they want to be able to experiment with their servers and everything. But you can probably trust them. With Firebase Analytics and the Google BigQuery export, you get free unsampled reporting. And this is the big mess in Google Analytics. If you're using the standard, the free tier, you won't get unlimited reporting. You will get sampled, you will get hit by row limits, even if you're on 360 Premium in the UI. But through BigQuery, everything is unsampled, you get all the data, but you have to pay for it, and it's charged per hit. So if you want to track a lot of stuff, which you want to in apps because there's so many small interactions, that's a drawback of the app tracking. And if you don't pay for it, Firebase Analytics is so much better because you get that unlimited reporting for free. Firebase has one. So when Firebase Analytics came out, Google Tag Manager was also upgraded, sort of, but I would call it downgraded to the Firebase SDK. So previously GTM was sort of integrated in the Google Analytics SDK, but now there's a new SDK, that's the Firebase SDK, so it's integrated into Firebase instead. So what happened was that with the old Google Tag Manager had the data layer, which had this very, very same concept as in the web. So you could basically use the same kind of tracking in the legacy Google Tag Manager world as you do on the web world for Google Tag Manager. But now with the new Firebase SDK, everything is based on Firebase events. So you log events and you can set user properties, but you don't build up this state of the data layer. So if you want to have a lot of custom tracking with Firebase, you have to send a lot of more things on each hit. But with the old Google Tag Manager data layer, you still sent a lot of things with a hit, but you could have a mental model in the data layer, which made it very, like, it wasn't that complex. So I think it's a drawback that the new GTM based off Firebase doesn't have the concept of the data layer. It has its own event flow, and that's sort of okay. But then Google tries to smooth everything over by saying that, well, with the Firebase Google Tag Manager, you get vendor template tags. Like that you can have other tags than Google tags, which is good, but I don't understand why they didn't just put it in the old Google Tag Manager legacy SDK that had the data layer concept. I think it's pretty bad. So, should you go for Firebase or GA Services SDK, the legacy mobile app tracking? If you're working for a corporation that has apps and web, and perhaps you have different brands, you have different properties. Perhaps you have your newspaper website that has a newspaper app for iOS and Android. But then you have a sister website, which is kind of like a forum that has its own web and its own apps. And then you want to merge all this in a roll-up property. You take all the data from all these properties, put them in one big basket, and you have them in a roll-up property, and you can use the user ID, the common denominator across all the properties. Then you have to go with the Google Analytics mobile app tracking, because you don't have that merge, that roll-up property. That concept doesn't exist in the Firebase world. But the Firebase world has the native Google BigQuery export. So if you're pretty technical, you can of course make if you already do all your reports in like Jupyter Notebooks or IPython or Tableau or whatever, then you can go with the Firebase. But if not, if you have like a big setup with everything, you should keep on working with their legacy Google Analytics app tracking, because it's the same kind of tracking as all the rest of your stuff, and it's easier to integrate it into it. If you're a solo developer or starting a new app, or if you're app only, go for Firebase. It's really, really, really good, and it has the Google BigQuery export, which I'm a huge fan of, and it's unsampled, unlimited, everything. It's free. It has no 360 SLA, but if you're small, you won't pay for it anyway. Just go for it. So Firebase Analytics is the future of mobile app tracking, and that's the way you should go if you're starting fresh. But if you come from the legacy world, which is based off a website, and perhaps the app is sort of just like an addition to your website, and you want to integrate the tracking with the website, I would prefer the legacy app tracking. Also, if you have this big complex thing and you want to keep the same methodology of tracking across web and app, you should use legacy app and perhaps the Google Tag Manager for mobile to use the data layer concept there and the data layer concept on the web, to make it easier to specify tracking to your developers. So the developers on the web can speak with the developers in the app, and everyone is speaking the same language of tracking. If you have the Google Analytics for web, and then you have Firebase Analytics for your app, then you have two different worlds, and only you as an analyst can merge them in Tableau, Data Studio, BigQuery, whatever you choose, but you cannot look at it in the same view. So it's more difficult to invite others to the data. If a Firebase Analytics web tracking comes out, I would say jump ship from Google Analytics and go to Firebase Analytics. I'm pretty sure that most of the ad integrations will come to Firebase as well, because Firebase is apps and mobile is the future. Everything is growing on mobile, even though desktop exists. Everything is mobile. I think Google wants to put a lot of emphasis into mobile in the ad integrations, and Firebase is what they're really putting a lot of effort into. So once they release web tracking, I think I would go over to Firebase. So short answer, if you're starting fresh, go with Firebase Analytics. If you're starting, if you're app only, Firebase Analytics. If you're more complex, perhaps in a big organization, big legacy organization, and you have a lot of old tracking that you want to keep, I would say go for the mobile app tracking, because it sort of integrates nicely with the rest of your tracking in the Google Analytics world. Thank you for watching this video. If you want to see more type of content like this, please write that in comments. If you want to see something else, write that in comments as well. Thank you all Fun Functions subscribers from MPJ's channel. It's great to see you. Welcome. I'm really happy that you're here. I hope you will stay subscribed. And then we'll see each other in the next video. Bye!